Ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, creatures of the night, welcome back to A Face for Horror. My name is Chris, but you can call me Moon. And tonight we're going to be discussing the 1996 horror classic Scream from Wes Craven. So this is one of those movies that I kind of feel a lot about this one, kind of like I did Halloween. It's a really good movie. I really enjoy the movie overall, but I think the movie itself is somewhat overrated. I know that's a controversial view, but I think that the movie itself is. I don't think that the impact that the movie had is. I think that it had a huge impact on horror movies in general and reviving the slasher genre. And I don't think that those can be completely overstated in how much of an impact it had going forward. The meta elements of it were a huge impact, for better or for worse. I generally prefer a more classic approach, but it is what it is. Some other movies pull it off good, some don't. Some crash and burn with it, but so if you don't know, Scream was written by Kevin Williamson, directed by Wes Craven, stars Neve Campbell, David Arquette, and Courtney Cox, as well as Matthew Lillard, Skeet Ulrich, Rose McGowan, and Drew Barrymore. That's brain fart. Sorry about that. And the movie kind of opens on a pretty iconic opening scene, cold open type, where Drew Barrymore gets the infamous phone call, and where the line "Do you like scary movies?" comes in. It's the trivia part of it is fun. I like that. I like that it acknowledges other movies in the genre. I love that it acknowledges the original Friday the 13th, and that it kind of uses it as a trick question. As someone who very much loves the original Friday the 13th movie, that's I really appreciated that. So we get the opening kill of her boyfriend, Steve. And then of course the ghost face killer chases her all over the house. Chases her out into the front yard, and she puts up a pretty good fight. He's pretty clumsy. He's not exactly not really a physically strong killer, and definitely not very graceful. But he kills her and he hangs her from a tree in the front yard just as her parents come home. This is a kind of a one of those things, he predicted that if she hung up on him again or didn't do what he wanted to do, he was going to gut her like a fish, and that's pretty much what the movie tells us that he did. So we get to school the next day and find out that our main character, Neve Campbell's Sydney, finds out that her friends were killed, and we find out as an audience that it's coming up on the 1 year anniversary of her mother's assault and murder. We meet all of her friends, kind of your classic Scooby Gang, high school students. Though there's a they play up on the tropes a lot in it, and they kind of went with them, and then they kind of didn't. Makes for an interesting group. Of course, most people's favorite character is Randy Meeks, the horror movie nut. You find out that that Stu has no tact whatsoever. You also find out that he dated Casey for a little while before she left him for Steve. So the stage is set for your classic teens in a horror movie, high school kids. So I'm a little under the weather, folks. I'm sorry, my voice is pretty bad tonight. Good evening, Miss Jen. Anyway, like I was saying, my voice is a little bit cracky. I've been kind of under the weather today, so y'all just have to bear with me a little bit. A little brain fogged. But so we meet the cast of characters. We find out that the Billy Loomis character, another Loomis reference. This movie is littered with Halloween references, as well as others, but there's some very open references and some very subtle references. Of course, everybody knows that that's a reference to Dr. Loomis from Halloween, as well as a Psycho reference. So anyway, Sydney's dad's out of town, and she wants to stay with her best friend Tatum, who's the Rose McGowan character. So while she's waiting on her to come and get her, she gets attacked. She gets a phone call first, and again, it plays on the same setup that it did the first time around with the do you like scary movies? And she says no, because it's the same old, same old. And then he attacks her, and she does exactly what she complained about people doing. So a little cat and mouse through the house. You can see that Sydney does fall for the trope of running up the stairs, but you can also see that she's a fighter. She puts up a good fight. You can also see that she's smarter than your average horror movie final girl. From the very beginning, she doesn't come into that sort of fight. She has it from the beginning. She has enough sense to because the way her closet door opens and the door to her room opens, she has enough sense to brace the inner door with the closet door. And just as the killer does the banging on the door and can't get through and runs away, Billy Loomis comes in. Her boyfriend Billy Loomis comes in through the second floor window, which I'm going to say is a reference to the rose trellis bit from Nightmare on Elm Street. It may not have been. They never actually show the trellis that I can remember, but anyway, he comes through a second floor window the same kind of way. Solid jump scare in that. He comes in and comforts her, and he drops a cell phone. Cell phones were not nearly as common in that day as they are now. Every single person didn't have one back then, and especially high school kids. 99% of the phones at that time didn't have internet access, so it was literally just a call home or emergency, kind of deal most of the time. Not really a whole lot of chat, because they were expensive back then too. Sorry about that. So he gets arrested because of the suspicious nature of the cell phone. He gets to school the next day. Well, you find out that Officer Dewey is David Arquette's character is Tatum's brother, and they leave from the police station, go back to her house, where Sydney's staying the night with her. On the way out, there's a really good scene where you again see the Nev Campbell's character, Sydney's willingness to fight and willingness to stand up for herself. Courtney Cox's character is a kind of a low budget, sleazy reporter, investigative reporter type. She definitely is more along the lines of the cheap news magazine, TV news magazine type reporter, but she definitely fancies herself a bit of Lois Lane. And she confronts Sydney coming out the back of the police station, and you find out that that the Courtney Cox character had written, Gail Weathers is her name, had written a book about Sydney's mother's murder, and that Sydney may have, that in Gail's eyes, Sydney has convicted an innocent man in the killings of her mother, and Gail makes kind of a smart comment and doesn't read the room and gets clocked for it. And it's a really good scene. It really shows Sydney's character very well. It also kind of sets up Gail's character, who's definitely a bitch in this one. And they go back to Tatum's house, and they can't find out at the police station that they can't find Sydney's dad, who's out of town on business. He was supposed to have been staying at the Hilton at the airport, and he never checked in. And they go back to Tatum's house, and they get another one of those phone calls from the killer. Really awesome element to it is the killer's voice. It's at the end when they do the reveal, it's shown that it's a voice changer, but it's actually a different actor. It wasn't anything like that. I had read that none of the actors in it had met the guy who was doing the phone voice. The first time that they heard the voice was actually when they were shooting those scenes. They used a direct connection, and so they were actually talking to him so that they would have a more realistic response than somebody off screen reading the lines. The guy has a solid menace to his voice and maintains it quite well. So when they first hear that voice, they were expecting Wes's voice or someone else's voice to be just reading the lyrics, and they are reading the lines. And they actually got an actor to do it, so you get a more genuine performance from the characters on screen. So it's one of those movies for me. I saw this in the theater. It lacks a lot of suspense. There's a lot of good humor in it, but there's not really until you get to the final act. and not even the end of the final act. It actually comes before the end of the final act. That there's any real suspense in this movie for me, even originally seeing it. And through kind of this section and into the party section is I kind of zone out when I rewatch this. For those parts, the beginning of it up to about this point, I really dig, and the end of it I really like. The middle act kind of drags for me. It's not by any means bad. The sequence at school the next day where the other kids are running through the hallway in the ghost face mask, where the principal, Henry Winkler, gets killed. There's nothing bad about those scenes. There's nothing bad about the beginning of the party. But it's just, I really pay attention to the beginning and I really pay attention at the end, and this part just kind of flatlines for me a little bit. But yeah, because the kids disrupting school wearing the cheap masks, and that's kind of a point that they make about it, that that those masks are really popular and that they're sold in every five and dime in department stores, what Dewey says, all over. So the mask is one of those, it's super generic for their world, the world that this movie exists in. So you get to, because of that, the principal dismisses school early and calls it off for the next couple of days. So the Stu character decides to throw a party at his house to celebrate being out of school unexpectedly. Which is where we get to some of the classic scenes in it. They all decide to go. There's a scene in the video store, which a lot of people love, but again, it's kind of falls flat. The Randy character works at the video store. The horror movie junkie works at the video store. There's kind of a confrontation between him and Stu and him and the Billy character. It's played for laughs, but comedy is so subjective, it just doesn't really get it for me. Have a lot of that with movies that try to blend it, try to blend horror and comedy together. A lot of it falls flat for me. Some of it I love, and some of it I like because it falls flat, but that's just me. So you go through that sequence where Randy pretty much accuses them of being the prime suspects. Of course, on a rewatch and all that, you know that's foreshadowing and set up, but it also highlights the tension between him. He's friends with them. He's friends with all the ones in the group, but he's also somewhat of an outsider. Which that part I do like. I really, like I said, Randy's my favorite character in this movie. Probably one of my favorites in the entire franchise, honestly. I really feel that it was a waste of a good character with what they did in the second one, but that was the writers. So but we move on to the party, and the Tatum character, Rose McGowan's character, goes downstairs to the garage to get more beer, and gets confronted by the Ghostface killer. And again, another character who puts up a solid fight. Tries to get away, hits him with the beer, beats him up, does pretty good job with it. And when she can't get back up out of the basement through the door because it's locked, she decides to go out through the roll-up doors for the garage through the kitty door. Interesting little trivia bit on it. She was supposed to struggle getting through the door, but she was actually, despite having a balcony you can do Shakespeare off of, so to speak, she was actually petite enough that she could compress herself down and actually climb through the door. Stories have varied over the years as to whether or not that was a custom built door by the prop department or whether they just went out and bought one from the local PetSmart and just turned out to be, that she turned out to be smaller than what they would assume. But so, but anyway, she would fit through it. The where they got it or whatever. You would think though, if it was the prop department, they would have modified it, because it took like 6 times to shoot the scene. But in the scene, she gets halfway out the door, and the Ghostface character rolls up the door. A reasonable suspension of disbelief here that little 1 horsepower garage door screw motor could lift somebody, let alone lift them up enough to choke them out, to kill them that way. It's one of those things that sometimes takes me out nowadays, knowing things, but at the time it really didn't. And sometimes if I'm really into the movie, it doesn't. This is kind of where it picks back up for me. Gail and Dewey are outside the party, trying to keep an eye on things. And eventually, Gail sneaks in and puts a camera in place. Her cameraman gets attacked. Everybody leaves to go and see the principal. They find out that the principal was killed, and everyone goes to see the crime scene. So it's left with just our principal cast there in the house. The party kind of dies down. Like I said, Gail's cameraman is attacked. She drives away with him on the windshield in the classic horror movie tropes. Nice little meta moment where they're in the van looking at the TV monitors of the camera that she planted, and they see the Ghostface character behind Randy, who's still in the living room watching the movie, which I failed to mention it. But during the party scene, there's a whole sequence about Randy gives his rules for surviving a horror movie. They've very much become cliche nowadays, and they weren't even 100% accurate at the time, but most people just kind of assumed that they were. There's actually a lot less movies that fit those bills perfectly, fit all of those rules. Never say I'll be right back, never have sex, never drink and all. There's a lot of movies that, never drink, never do drugs. There's a lot of movies that do not fit that mold 100%. So, Randy's rules are hit and miss, for the 80s movies. So we get running around in the house, and actually, I also, after that, there's a scene where after the rules and before all the chaos starts happening at the end, there's a scene where Sydney's character finally gives in to Billy's character and has sex with him. which of course means that she now fits the rules that Randy laid out for everybody. In hindsight, watching it, and after you know who the killers are, when Randy's going over his rules is after Tatum is killed, and the Stu character is going down to the basement to get more beer, and of course does the "I'll be right back." Well, if he went into the not basement, but down into the garage, so there's your first, well, not your first, but there's definitely a major element if you're paying attention, because we find out that they didn't pull the body down, so Tatum's still hanging in the garage door. If he wasn't the killer or one of them, as the case may be in this movie, he definitely would have noticed that. So Sydney and Billy have sex, which means she now fits the rules, and she still kind of doesn't trust him. There's still something not quite right with them. And just about the time he starts to say something about it, the killer comes into the room and stabs him with the knife. And she escapes and runs away. And it's kind of where our main climax starts, where all the real excitement is. Runs outside, and that's where she runs back into Gale, and they get back to the house, and about the same time that they get to the house, Stu and Randy both come up onto the porch and find that Dewey's been knocked out, and Sydney doesn't know who to trust, and she finally, and Billy comes rolling down the stairs, all beaten up and barely alive, apparently. So turns out, of course, that Billy and Stu are in on it together. They shoot Randy. And then they explain their, they go into their monologue and explain why they're doing it and what they're doing, to Sydney. And, it's one of those things where, you know, there's famous lines, horror movies don't create psychos, they make psychos better. They make psychos more creative, that's the line. So Billy stabs Randy or stabs Stu, and Stu slashes the Billy character, and about that time Gale comes to and has Dewey's gun, but unfortunately she's not somebody who knows her firearms very well, and they realize that the safety's still on. So they take the gun away from her, but in the meantime, Sydney escapes, gets away from them, and starts toying with them. Another one of those famous one-liners, the Stu character, after being told that they called the cops, the Stu character, you know, that his parents are going to be really upset with him. Which, that line doesn't really land for me very much either, but I like Matthew Lillard enough that I don't have an issue with that line. It's not, it's one of those things that just kind of got a smirk out of me and nothing more. And it's like, you know, yeah, it's Matthew Lillard. Okay. A little chase around the house, and Sydney stabs Billy with an umbrella, drops the TV on Stu, and ends up shooting Billy. Randy was only lightly wounded. Dewey was only lightly wounded. Gail and Sydney were kind of beaten up. And of course, the final jump scare, as predicted by Randy, and Sydney shoots him between the eyes. So there's a lot of people out there who want to see Stu come back. I like Matthew Lillard. Reasonable suspension of disbelief. It's a slasher movie. If they bring him back, okay. If not, okay. I've enjoyed the sequels to this for the most part. Not a huge fan of 3. Well, actually, I hate 3. I don't really hate it, but it had the potential to be a lot better than what it was. 2 I like. 4 I like. 5 was pretty good, not great. And 6 is the first 2 acts are great, and then you get to the reveal, and the movie went to shit. I'm not going to go into the rest of them too much. But yeah, that final act on part 6 sucked. This movie had a lot of impact for the 90s. It had a lot of impact for movies that have come out since. It made it pretty much okay to directly reference other movies. It made it okay for this type of movie to exist in another, for a slasher movie to exist in another slasher movie. A lot of other movies far back as the 80s made reference to horror movies and monster movies and things, but it was never, no titles were ever directly mentioned that I know of. It may have happened in some, and I may not even be remembering some that I liked that it happened in. But as far as I can remember off the top of my head, there wasn't any direct titles mentioned. There were definitely scenes and sequences and ideas lifted, and sometimes characters would point them out. I know that I can't remember the name of it now. There's a character called Rooster who is in a slasher movie from the 80s who was one of the inspirations for Randy. I know Kevin Williamson had said that in a couple of different movies. I can't remember what the movie that was from was. Final Exam. That's the movie. And I'm sure that there were others who did that sort of thing too before the Randy character. I know that Friday the 13th Part 6 makes a reference to any big guy in a hockey mask in the middle of the road at night is not friendly, kind of thing. So I mean, it happened before that, but this is the one that brought it back, and brought slashers back and really reinvigorated horror movies. The studio actually released this movie in December. It was originally scheduled for January, where movies go to die, kind of thing. But they pulled it back at kind of the last minute, and opened it the week before Christmas. And it's been said that it was done because they wanted to give people who were tired of the family movies and the holiday movies a choice of something to watch. And it's also been said that there was complications with something else that was supposed to have been released at that time, and a month ahead of time wasn't going to be able to be released, so they pulled this one from January back to December. And like the first week it was out, it didn't really do very well. And they were afraid it was going to bomb, but word of mouth, more so than the actual advertising campaign peaked this one. And when you take into account the time of year it was released, it did like 120 million or something like that. So on like a 15-20 million dollar budget, something like that. So it really blew up, and it put Wes Craven back on the map. It put horror movies back on the map. It appealed to people who were fans of 80s slashers. It was it had enough well-known names in it. Drew Barrymore, of course, lended a bit of name recognition to it. Nev Campbell was pretty popular with the late teens, 20-something set because of Party of Five. And the others had done a few things around and about. And so it had that it hit that same mark that like the first two Friday the 13th movies did. It had pretty young people in it. It had a bit of a name with Drew Barrymore. So it drew in a lot of people, and it showed that people wanted that old school feel back. There's a lot of this movie that's very retro. A lot of this movie that feels very classic. It kind of makes fun of the classics. It's one of those things on that one that I'm not 100% on board with. A lot of people say that it lovingly sends them up, and I don't know that there's a whole lot of love in it. Feel like there might be kind of a point on the end of that. And I don't necessarily think that it's the best at doing that. I think it sacrifices some elements that it could have had if it was a more straightforward horror movie. And it went on to influence the rest of the 90s into the early 2000s, for both good and bad, like I said at the beginning. And like I said, I think that this movie is somewhat in and of itself overrated. I don't think it has the rewatchability of some of the 80s stuff. It's a little too slickly produced. It's a little too polished. And for me, the comedy just isn't as good as it could be. There's a lot of elements to it that work, and then there's some that just don't. But overall, it's got a good cast. The acting in it is very well acted. The direction is good. It's got a decent pace to it. Like I said, for me, the middle part of it drags a little bit, but for most people, I don't think it does. I think that's just a me thing on that one. I have all of the things that I have that are detractions from this movie are not massive detractions. It's not a major issue with this movie. I have no major faults with this movie. So overall, I don't give ratings on this one, and I'm not gonna rate this one, but it's a positive experience for the most part. I just don't find myself drawn back to it, like I do some of the more classic 80s stuff, and even a couple of the contemporaries to this one. I would watch them before I watched this one, but I acknowledge the quality of it. I acknowledge its legacy. I'm glad that we have the legacy from it that we do. I'm glad that it brought horror back, and that it brought horror back to the mainstream to some degree. There's a lot of people who saw this movie in that time, and a lot of people who saw this movie on video after that that really weren't. This is a good gateway horror for somebody who is only mildly interested in it. There's not a lot of gore. There's the garage kill is somewhat creative, but everything else is the same old buck knife. So there's not a whole lot of creativity when it comes to that. The whodunit element is fun, but once you know the secret to it, once you know the reveal on it, you've kind of got to either be one of those people who can block that out and just roll with it and enjoy it for what it is, which is something that you can do with this one, without a whole lot of trouble. Or you're going to be somebody who's going to sit there and nitpick and look for every clue that's in it, and then once you feel like you found them all, then you're probably not going to go back to it. I like this movie. I can watch this movie. I'm just not drawn back to it. It's not. I don't walk up to the movie cabinet and go, "Oh, let's watch Scream again." But if I happen to just be in the right kind of mood, or there's a new one coming out, like there is soon, yeah, I can revisit the franchise and have a good time with it. Enjoy it. I don't dislike it. I can watch it when I choose to watch it. It's just not one of those that pops into my head and I have to go run and watch. So with all that being said, I am positive on this movie. I think that it's a good movie. I think that the quality is there. I think that the movie itself is somewhat overrated, but as a franchise and as an impact on culture, I think that this movie, it very much deserves its reputation as what it gets. So I'm going to wrap it up there tonight, guys. Thank you all so much for joining me. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. Speaking of comments, I have a rewind. Replay from last week. Hobbs Horror once again left a comment, and he caught the replay of the show. Thank you, Hobbs, for that. And again, like, comment, subscribe. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, ring the bell so you know when I drop another video. These are going to continue Wednesday nights. If you're listening to this on Spotify, which I am now on Spotify, I'm on Amazon, all of those things like that. I'm still not on iTunes yet, as of recording this. I've got a bid in, but I'm still not available on iTunes. But do me a favor, after you listen to an episode or so, go hit the rating button. Give me a 5-star rating, please. It helps get the podcast out there. I hope you've all enjoyed this. And I've enjoyed this myself tonight. Despite being a little under the weather, I do apologize for my voice. But I'm going to end it here, folks. As always, y'all be good, y'all be safe, and y'all have a good one.